Hi, everyone. Hello. Happy Monday, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 700th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Ann McCoy, Olga Spiegel, MM Serra, and Andrew Woolbright. We're thrilled to welcome poet Bianca Rae Messinger here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for actual necessary decolonial work, but are a reminder of place of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustained and enriched the stolen land that we're speaking from. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's guests and host. Ann McCoy is a New York-based artist whose long career as a painter, printmaker, sculptor, art critic, and teacher has focused on the spiritual content of art history and art making. McCoy has studied alchemy since the early 70s when she was awarded the Prix de Rome in 1989, which allowed her to work with alchemical collections at the Vatican Library. McCoy is an editor-at-large with the Brooklyn Rail. Artist Olga Spiegel was born in France while her family was in hiding after fleeing Belgium during the war. She moved to New York City in 1964. Nurtured by psychedelic art, surrealism, and science fiction, Spiegel has created a unique visual language where she can present in her words spaces of wonder that point to ever-changing notions of the universe and our sense of being. Experimental filmmaker, curator, author, and educator MM Serra is the executive director of the Filmmakers Cooperative, the oldest and largest archive of independent media in the world. She's created over 30 films herself and is the recipient of numerous awards. She lives and works in New York, where she continues to curate programs, make films, and create community. And our host today is artist, curator, and critic Andrew Woolbright, who is based in Brooklyn, New York, and is an MFA graduate from RISD in painting and an editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail. Woolbright is the founder and director of the gallery Below Grand, located on the Lower East Side in New York, and currently teaches at the School of Visual Arts and Pratt. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chloe, and thank you for the Brooklyn Rail, as always, for assembling this wonderful conversation and all the work that goes into creating this conversation. And hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in on a Monday. And I'm so excited to get right into this very quickly and talk about this amazing show up at Andrew Edlin Gallery with Ann McCoy, Paulina Peavy, and Olga Spiegel. We're joined here today by Ann and Olga, and the show is up until December 3rd. So you have another week or so to see it if you haven't already. But if you have, it's worth going back to and seeing again and again. So quickly, I just wanted to really, I absolutely uncritically loved this show. I've sent so many students to it and I keep telling people to go see it. And I think it really, for me, offers a slow speed that maybe we're not programmed to let ourselves to have at this time anymore. It's an insistence on it, though, and it's insistence on work that has lots of esoteric knowledge built into it. Things aren't easily communicated or graspable, but it's trying to do what the best art can do in keeping something that gives you the crumbs of information, but keeps things mysterious and esoteric and exciting. And so I love this insistence of slow viewing. And this show really rewards slow viewing, taking time with these things and allowing your mind to wander and potentially dream at the end of seeing these. And the other thing that I was thinking about this morning of why I appreciated this so much is it really inverts what could be solipsistic. These are artists that are really diving deep into themselves, into their own subconscious, into their own dream world, but it doesn't end at them. It's trying to get it universal dreams, a larger subconscious, get at feelings that, although personal to each of them, it ends in a place that we can all connect to and relate to and find a place in. I think that's lost by a lot of work today. So all that being said, highly recommend this show for everyone who hasn't seen it. Please go see it if you can. Let's go to the next slide real quick. These are three of Anne's wonderful giant drawings. It took considerable time to put together. And Anne, on that note, can you talk to us about what we're looking at in the first slide and these two slides, and the amount of time and the dreams that you're really mining in your work for these?
I'd rather go into my, I think I will handle it better in my slideshow.
Okay.
The first drawing I'm going to be discussing, these two drawings are from the 80s. So I think it would be better to do this in the slideshow. Sorry.
Of course. And then these are two of Olga's works as well. And I love the use of color, but we'll get further into that. But let's move on to Anne's first work, so we can, because we have a lot to get to today.
Beautiful.
Oh, there. So Anne, you've been at this language for years now. These drawings have considerable investment. They're incredibly personal. They're based on dreams, but also your background in education and writing. But can you talk to us about your practice and where you come from, and what this one is based off of?
This is based on an idea, a Rosicrucian idea of an invisible college, where you with a lot of the Rosicrucians and the alchemists believed that there was sort of an invisible college where you got knowledge through the unconscious and through revelation. And this is I did a whole series on this. This drawing took about 2.5 years because of the little stars. But this is a church-like structure that you enter imaginally. It is that deals with this invisible college. So this is we don't believe in the imagination as a source of wisdom anymore. And because of I'm sort of a Jungian, and I believe that the unconscious, as opposed to the Freudian personal unconscious, which is more about the unconscious as a sort of repository of childhood trauma, Jung felt that in the archetypal realm of the collective unconscious, these archetypes had a kind of dynamism, a kind of life of their own, and that by taking this deep dive into the unconscious, one could sort of experience a transformation. My next slide, I'm just going to jump in right here because we don't have a lot of time. My next slide. Yes, this is a drawing. This is the work I was doing in the 70s when I was in around the time I was in Berlin. And all of my work deals with, this is from a series called the Night Sea Journey. In alchemy, the Night Sea Journey is when the alchemists are taken to the bottom of the sea in a glass boat, very much like Jonah and the whale. So that when you take this deep dive into the unconscious, into these water realms, you come up a different person. You come up transformed. You know, Jonah came up and walked with a limp. You come up in a different way. And I've always been very interested in this idea of going into the depths of the unconscious and having some kind of transformational experience. I experienced years and years of clinical depression, and normally we think of that as in our society as something to be medicated away. But in my instance, I did my best work when I was depressed, and I feel that for me, it was sort of an elevator down into the unconscious. This work is owned by it has actually a title in Irish, which is called, translates to the star that shines in the water. This is owned by the Smithsonian Museum of American Art. Next.
Well, before we move on, I told Anne the other day, I love this drawing. I feel like if there's a flag for the Brooklyn Rail, this might make a great flag. Like, I love this beautiful, endless, boundaryless coral reef of just seeing all these floating, growing things and the jellyfish in it, and like a deep space to the bottom of the ocean. Like it's a beautiful network. And I love this drawing.
Thank you. That's so sweet. That's so sweet. Thank you. I did an issue June 2014 of the Brooklyn Rail on the unconscious. Actually, Fong refers to it as the mental illness issue, which I love.
It's amazing.
I want to thank the Brooklyn Rail, and I want to thank the Andrew Edlin Gallery. You guys have been great. So next. So this was a I'm obviously from a Catholic world. This was a drawing I did. My mother went insane. My adoptive mother went insane, and she was in an institution. And here are pictures of her in this drawing. And this drawing is called "Washing the Leprous Mother in the Rivers of in the Waters of the Jordan River." The Jordan River had was a huge symbol for me as a child, because my grandmother had gone to Israel, or Palestine at that time. It was in the probably in the 20s, and had brought back stones from the Jordan River. And if you know the story of Naaman the Syrian, who's cured by being bathed in the Jordan River is a symbol of a kind of baptism of a new spiritual life. In this, I had a very powerful dream that I was with my mother. You can see my mother and me in the waters, surrounded by dead bodies. And suddenly the waters became beautiful and shimmering and luminescent. And these butterflies came out of the water. And I had this amazing experience. And I guess I realized that I had been submerged in the same waters as my mother. And I was able to transform this horrible experience of what had happened with my mother in this really positive way. And I sort of saw the beauty somehow in this kind of realizing, how the waters we share, and seeing this as a transformational experience. I still have this wonderful Jordan stone on my desk.
Well, I love that, one, how you use drawing. Like, I feel like painting, or like if it became more about the facture, like the materiality of paint, there would be something that would be lost. That the way you're rendering everything really feels like a dream. And there's this vividness of like some things being very clearly in focus, and like this kind of Picabia sense of like transposing different realities onto each other. I just love how you've evoked a dream, or chosen to evoke a dream.
It's a dream. It's funny. You and I were talking about Byzantine space before. This Sunday I was venerating icons, and with the type of space, you begin the process, and it's a reverse perspective that opens out behind the icon. When you venerate an icon, you go through the icon and you enter the world of the spirit behind the icon. And the same thing happens for me in the dream space, that the dream space opens out, and this has no rational type of Western perspective, because it's a dream space. It's an inner space. I'm drawing the inner space. And I never liked painting. I couldn't stand it. I'm allergic to it. And I think I'm a reincarnated Chinese literati, because I always identified with sort of paper surface and little marks.
Yeah, I mean, beyond all of the content and all of the ideas in this work that I very much love and relate to, it's just exciting to see big drawings that are unabashedly giant big drawings.
Thank you. I want to kind of rip through some of these so we can see them if we can. We have a lot. Okay, next. This that's actually John Copeland's. He was the only older man I knew who would take off his clothes to be photographed. This is called The Death of the King. And in alchemy, a great deal of alchemy has to do with the death of the old personality, the old ruling factor of consciousness, which is symbolized by the king, and the death of the king. And here you have the death of the king, with his whirlpool, taking the corpse to the bottom again, and a kind of resurrection and conjunctio in the heavens. So much of my work deals with this. Unfortunately, this was shown once in the 90s, before the 90s in New York, but it's never been shown again. Next, I'm just going to go through some of these really fast so you could see some. This is when I lost all of my art dealers. I began having dreams of rotting corpses, and I'm very involved with work of someone named Heinrich Zimmer, who wrote a book called The King and the Corpse. And he said that when you are having dreams of corpses, it's psychological material that hasn't completely been processed. And I started doing these corpse drawings. The one on the left, I do these using the bog people. Oddly enough, both Freud and Jung took a trip together to Scandinavia to see these bog people. So, you know, this work has always been censored. It has never been shown. No dealer has ever allowed this to be shown, which is kind of interesting. Next, probably never will. Next, okay, this one actually is in the Hirshhorn in Washington, D.C., and this is the beginning of my Osiris series. A lot of my work deals with death and resurrection, the death of older parts of ourselves and the rebirth of more spiritual parts of ourselves. I had a lot of dreams about Osiris, and I spent a lot of time in Egypt, actually. I had some amazing dreams in Egypt, and this is one of these drawings that deals with this kind of you have a lot of the images of like the crocodiles that rescue the pieces of Osiris from the river. Next,
well, I mean, this one also, going back to that one real quick, that's a great example of that bottom shape being that Byzantine perspective or that reverse perspective of the way you use the bottom of the drawing to finish in the viewer and create that icon experience is done really well.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, the way it opens back. Thank you very much. That's true. Next. Okay. This drawing is actually owned by the Des Moines Art Center. I had a patron, and drawings were sold to museums and given to museums in the 80s. This patron has since died, so sadly for me. This is a drawing of the resurrection of Osiris. The myth of Osiris is basically at the root of much alchemy. Much alchemy deals with transubstantiation, incarnation, and death and resurrection. The idea of death and resurrection has always been incredibly important to me, whether it links to agricultural renewal or psychological renewal. Next, I wanted to get through some of these. Next. I'm also interested in the idea of eggs. I've done a lot of work with eggs. I do a lot of drawings that contain eggs. I put this in not for vanity's sake, but because it gives you a sense of scale of this drawing. This drawing is called The Death of My Father. And this drawing very much deals with death and resurrection. My father as the dying king. My childhood dream was that my father was killed by my mother as the evil queen in Alice in Wonderland and was dismembered and chopped up and ground up with a mortar and pestle. And I mean, this is kind of a wild dream to have because my father was a scientist and had a laboratory. It wasn't until I entered Jungian analysis that I discovered the dream of Zosimus of Panopolis, where he talks about the dismemberment of the king, the grinding up of the king, and baking the king into a cake. So this idea of the death and resurrection, the death of an old type of thinking, and then kind of the rebirth of another. So here again, you've got the egg as a symbol of rebirth with the alchemical furnace below. And the crows, you see these crows departing, and the crows are the symbol of the alchemical nigredo. Alchemy begins with something called the nigredo. The first step deals with darkness, blackness, death, decay, and depression. And then all of the other states kind of proceed after that. So this is a very interesting psychological state. Probably not when you're in it, but it certainly is great for paint from. Next.
Well, sorry, real quickly on that one. I mean, we talked about it yesterday, but this one, you're often doing this thing where you're setting up like a kind of proscenium sense of space or like a theatrical space where the bottom of each of your drawings is creating a block or a weight that then you're visualizing this world into, which really lets us kind of step into it. And I think that, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, it is. That's a very good observation. You know, I have a background in theater. I was not teaching at Yale. I was teaching at Yale the last 10 years, not in the art department, but in the School of Drama. So I did projection for theater. I have a background in theater.
Yeah, and this has that stage set up, but but again, what I love about this piece, and something that we're going to get into with Olga's work too, is that this idea of this, it could be solipsistic, but there's this through line in art history, Fra Angelico, Giotto, Blake, all these alchemists and Rosicrucians, of artists that realize that what would later be like popularized by like Abby Warburg and the Mnemosyne, of like, my internal subconscious is relatable to these dreams of other people. And you can look at history of like this consistency with seeing, you know, Osiris mud effigies and the dreams of Osiris in your own. Like it's really trying to open up the world beyond yourself through your deep investigation of self, which I appreciate.
I mean, the thing about becoming involved with the unconscious and especially the collective unconscious in a deep way is that it opens you out into a world that's much bigger than anything you ever personally could have imagined. Could we move to a slide? I just want to get through a few of these while we're at it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it opens you up to a world that is much bigger than anything you could have imagined. I'm also interested in the deep transformational aspect of the unconscious. This, after my adoptive mother died, I did a series called the Mad Mother series, and I was working with what's called the mother inside, the imago mater, the Freudians call it the internalized mother. And I had these dreams of my mother as a giant spider. The dream that you saw about the Jordan River came after this. This was the initial dream. There in the eyes are my mother's faces. And part of the sadness, that something that makes me sad in the art world is that we're given these topics. Like right now, everything has to be gender, or last year it was ecology. Every year we're given topics, but I feel like we rarely get to deal with realities. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the first person to have a crazy mother. I'm sure I'm not the first person to have to deal with this dark mother imagery. And I feel that I hate this kind of Whitney program approach where people are given the topic that you're supposed to make art out of, rather than dealing with what I think are really personal things for many people, or topics that for me are more important. I mean, my God, if we can't deal with our mother and the internalized mother, that's a big topic. So this has been heavily censored. This has only been shown once in a gallery in Los Angeles. Most of my work has been censored. It is it's not been shown by people because they come in the studio, they take one look at this and they go running for the hills.
Well, and totally, and your work, this one deals with putrefaction and the idea of the corpse, and not trying to push death away, but understanding that putrefaction is a part of this wheel, or a part of this cycle.
Yeah, next, I'm just going to try to get through some of these slides so people can see. We don't have too many more. Next slide. There. I just wanted to show, this is the last stage of the Mad Mother series. I just wanted to show it because this is the albedo stage, the white stage of alchemy, the spiritualized stage. This is me and my brother with our dog. And this relates to a peak religious experience I had in a temple in India, in a Jain temple, quite by surprise. And I had an amazing dream where I was holding my mother like a pieta. I was holding her though. And it was an incredible, and it was interesting that I would have this in a Jain temple because their whole thing is this thing about this giant festival of forgiveness they practice. So, Irish people tend to, I don't know. Somebody said that the definition of Irish Alzheimer's is that you forget everything but the resentments. And this is certainly part of my character. And this dream was very meaningful to me because it had to do with the alchemical process of the albedo, which is the spiritualized whitening process, but also feelings of complete forgiveness in terms of my personal psychology with my mother, and the importance of forgiveness. Right now, nobody ever talks about forgiveness. And I think that this is such an important part of religious traditions like Jainism and Christianity. So next, we don't have too many more. Because I want Olga to have some time. We have 5 more minutes. So I want to show just a few more. Okay. This is the alchemical rebus. I'm not going to discuss it too much. This is again, in alchemy is all about bringing two opposites together, and two opposites definitely are male and female. So in Jung's psychology, it's all about bringing these two elements together, the reconciliation of these two opposites between the male and the female. I'm just going to zip through these. I've got 6 more slides. Next. This was a show I did in Arizona. This was also one of the last slides in the Mad Mother series. And this is called Lunar Birth. And here I have this androgynous child being born out of the thing. It's very sad to me right now that there is such an animus against both Christianity and spirituality generally in the art world, where any religious content is really poo-pooed. And it's very sad to me because I really believe in the importance of symbols. You know, I was really depressed one time and I saw a Buddha, the birth of the Buddha in the caves of Ellora, and it changed me for a year. And so this idea that these archetypal symbols like the divine birth or the divine birth of a child have become kind of pushed out of the art discourse, it makes me sad. And next. Here you have this again, this is this with this, it was an androgynous child, this idea of this divine child in a lamp. Next. This is a work that was in the Venice Biennale in the Art and Alchemy show. It was acquired by the San Francisco Museum, and after the Venice Biennale, it has never been shown. This is a work I had dealing with the rubedo aspect of alchemy, where my heart was exposed in a series of dreams, and I did a whole series on the heart. I actually did autopsies for this, and I actually lost more dealers doing this. Next. And this is, again, one of the rubedo drawings where the Red Queen is getting married to the Red Man coming out of the bog. This is the rubedo process in alchemy, which has to do with passion and spirit coming in to the process. I'm very
I was just going to say, I like the mixing of temporalities too, or the mixing of the worlds, and like the ground being made up of souls and bodies, and then the coffin having that, like the way you're able to translate, and drawing does this so well, different types of touch for different staticness or dream spaces is really amazing.
Much of the alchemical in texts like the Rosarium feature coffins. I wanted to just talk about this a little bit. We have 3 minutes left or 4 minutes left, and then so we're kind of winding up here. This is my Guggenheim project, and I wanted to kind of end on this. This will probably never be shown because of the image of the Mary on the right, but this was a very important drawing for me because my father did a lot of inventions with tungsten byproducts that were used on everything from bulbs to the nose cones of rockets. He died of radiation poisoning from working at Rocky Flats. He died of cancer along with many people who worked with him. But I spent a lot of my childhood in mines and in assay offices where these ores were being refined. And much of alchemy has to do with the refinement of the ores, refining, starting with lead and moving up, through to silver to gold. And so this idea of the transmutation of metals was really part of my childhood. I cleaned my father's glassware on Saturdays in his lab. That was my little job. And I spent a lot of time in these assay offices and these labs. And my father owned a share in something called the Wolf Tongue Mill, which was in Nederland, Colorado. And I spent a lot of time in that mill. These are ore crushers in the upper left-hand corner. Those are the tables where they shook the ore, kind of like it's sort of the same process that you get with panning gold, and then washing the ore. And I had many, many dreams that took place in this giant, it filled a whole mountainside in this giant mill. And I had dreams that I would be in there and these wolves would visit. And here I am in my communion dress, and here I am with the wolf. And there's a black wolf and a white wolf and the alchemical furnace. And I always had these dreams where I would, in this process of this thing, the notion of the divine feminine was very important to me. I had a huge Marian devotion as a child. I have an image of the Virgin Mary with the Sacre-Cœur and the image of the Mary as a lamp. And for me, this was very important because we live in a society where the idea of the sacred feminine has been completely obliterated. And I mean, that was one of the great remnants of probably the Catholic churches, that they kept this idea that you could have a sacred feminine. And for me, this was very important because the sacred feminine figures in dreams, whether as a fairy godmother, as the Virgin, as an angelic presence, this idea that one could have both in the unconscious and in the dream world and in one's religious life, this idea of a divine presence of the feminine. This has been completely obliterated. And, for me, I think that it's sad that spiritual content, religious content, we have a kind of war on psyche where people don't really understand the importance of the dream world. And for me, I guess all of my art is about that. And I'm very grateful to have this exhibition. I probably, God knows if I'll have another one for years. I mean, I don't know. As I said, most dealers and curators take one look at this work and run the other way. So, hope springs eternal, and I'm grateful to have had this exhibition. So, thank you so much. And I came out exactly on time. So now we are going to go to the fabulous Olga.
Well, hold on a second. Hold on a second. And I've got some questions for you in all of this,
okay.
because two questions that come.
Theater, I'm down to the minute. Okay, go ahead.
I know. Two questions that I think we have time to answer. Okay. The process of these drawings, they take years. Are you mapping out the drawing and then slowly filling it in, or are you kind of starting in an area and slowly building it out? Because there are moments like the coral reef that I could totally be, talked into believing that you are like finding the drawing as you're moving left to right or up to down, or as you're moving across it. And then there are drawings that there's so many vanishing points in this drawing. It's a very complex structure, but it has such a really wonderful sense of space to it. How are you planning these things, and how much of it's intuitive, and how much are you working out in the practice of drawing?
This drawing took me 2.5 years, unfortunately, because for 8 months in the middle, I lost my eyesight. I had to have 2 eye operations, and I had a difficulty with my right eye. So I had a hard time working on this. I start with an initial dream usually. And as I'm working, I'll start with an initial image. I started with the chemical flasks. And then I started with the ore crushers at the top and the big beds coming down. And then I think I drew the wolf and myself. I started on the left drawing, but I start and I never have a general idea. Like this drawing on the right side turned out completely different than I had even thought of. As I draw the drawing, I have more dreams. Things will radically change. I'll have a vision. While I'm working on these, the drawing is sort of in my head in this space. And I will often rework it in my head as before I start working with it. And they never come out as they're planned. They really have a creative life of their own. I don't use a grid system or anything like this. This definitely has a kind of reverse perspective where you are at the beginning, and the drawing, instead of going back in space, opens out. Instead of going into the distance, it opens out. The way you have that kind of space in icons. I mean, Agnes Pelton was very involved with the space of icons. So it's unfortunately that idea of that reverse perspective and that kind of perspective. Unfortunately, one of the biggest proponents of that was an art historian and genius named Pavel Florensky, but unfortunately he had a bullet put in the back of his head in 1937 in the Gulag. So we're now just rediscovering his work on the sacred and his writing on things like the iconostasis. We're just recovering it. And many, many art historians are starting to read Florensky again, who felt that the spiritual practice was really part of the creative process. This is something, if you talk like this at the Whitney program, they would, I don't know, put you in a straitjacket and carry you out. When I was teaching at Yale, the last 10 years, I was teaching in a class called visual iconography and also the history of projection. And I had a lot of students come over from fine arts graduate school to take this class. And all of the fine arts students would come up to me and say, every single thing that you're discussing in your class, I could not mention in a crit. So it's, I think somebody asked me how you could change the art world. And I said, probably an Irish solution, like maybe some plastic explosives under the Whitney program or Bard curatorial. I mean, sorry, I shouldn't be, but I come from an Irish Republican family, obviously, IRA.
Well, I think the other part of it is
something huge.
Well, I think the other part of it too is like, I mean, it's pure magic to hear you answer in that way, because the other condition that I think about is like being on the academic side and teaching. So much of teaching has come down to doing studies and figuring out a way to make work very fast and quickly and on time. And like the idea of sitting down and not knowing where the drawing is going and letting it really unfold and build out from left to right as you go and as you dream, and for it to change as you go, is incredibly not a condition being utilized right now. And I think that's very tragic. So it's just a way to explore it.
And I was very lucky to have met Joseph Beuys in 1977. It changed my life because I had always felt like an alien in the art world. I mean, if I'd met Harry E. Smith, I probably wouldn't have felt that way. But I think that Beuys was really interesting to me because he loved alchemy. He loved Rudolf Steiner. He really believed in a kind of bigger world. And I probably have related more to artists like Beuys and Hermann Nietzsche or Carolee Schneemann. I think that the way critical theory has cut down the discussion and has frozen the whole thing. I mean, I'm very lucky that I knew people like Stan Brakhage. I'm very lucky that I knew Joseph Beuys, and I think that, and I'm old, I'm 76. Nobody can fire me. I can't get drummed out of an academic post anymore for being an Irish irreverent. When you've got nothing to lose. And I thank God for Fong Bui. Fong was the first person to really publish me. So except for Meaning Magazine with Mira and Susan. But, I want to thank the Brooklyn Rail because they have allowed me to do many, I think 70 pieces of writing over the years from other kinds of perspectives. And I think this is the important thing about the Brooklyn Rail is they allow for other points of view. And I'm deeply grateful for them. So I think I've way gone over. Like, go to Olga.
We've got time for one more. The last question is, and I don't know if it's relevant or not, but I'm wondering how you bring up the concept of the divine feminine. I'm wondering what you think of the work of like Marjorie Cameron, or like dealing with like the like maybe the occult version of the feminine. Like, I feel like there's a translation of drawing, but then there's a different world. There's like an oppositeness to it, maybe that she's translating more of like the nightmare. Then this is like really getting into like the sanctity and, like you said, forgiveness and like rebirth.
I mean, I believe in the divine feminine. I certainly have dealt with the Mad Mother, with the dark aspects of the feminine, the Kali aspects. But for me, I'm a believer. I mean, I'm a believer. I mean, it's very difficult because most of the discussions of Catholic artists have dealt with the transgressive, Karen Finley with the chocolate, or Serrano with Piss Christ. But I feel that the voice, I'm a very big friend of Linda Montano, and there are a lot of us out there, probably even Mary Magdalene there. There are a lot of us out there who still believe, in the transformative power of Our Lady. It's interesting. On the 12th of December coming up, we will have the Festival of the Guadalupe, and I always go to that Mexican church on 14th Street. I think that this idea of the feminine healing power of the sacred feminine is very important. And I think there's a huge, I belong to a website on Mary and another one on the Rosary. I think there are a lot of women who are really looking at this now again. And this is an energy that talk about the patriarchy. This is an energy that people who don't believe in psyche, don't believe in religion, don't believe in spirituality. Theodore Adorno would not have liked this drawing, trust me.
Yeah. We live in a market that conditions pragmatism. Olga, let's move on to you. Thank you so much, Anne. It was wonderful. And Olga, you're dealing with a lot of these same ideas of the subconscious and the dream, but maybe in a less direct way and sometimes purely abstract way. So could you talk to us about Jam Session, which 1968, incredible work at that time?
Well, first of all, I don't dream. I don't remember my dreams. I think my dreams happen on the canvas, basically. And the Jam Session, I was married to a musician, and we used to have a lot of jam sessions. So we had a loft on 18th Street. There were jazz, new jazz. And so I guess this sort of was the inspiration. I would paint in the room and all the musicians would play around me. So I had a number of pieces that were influenced, I guess, by music. And first of all, I have to thank Andrew Edlin. I have to thank the Rail for making this possible. And M too, she's part of it. And it's been quite an experience for me. A lot of this work has never been seen. And especially my work from the 60s has never been seen. And it was sort of picked out of like, a cupboard where they were hidden away. So I'm kind of surprised myself about having it seen.
The scale of this is very interesting. It's tall and seems very figural. And then you've got these colors that kind of, translate sound or translate the feelings of sound maybe through your body.
During that period in my early work was more optical. It had a lot to do with the reaction of colors against colors. Sometimes the colors would vibrate. I was actually going more after color vibrations. You look at it and it sort of takes you into another space.
Can we move on to the next slide? I think color is kind of the
this painting here was completely hidden. I have no idea. I guess it sort of translates the same way. And actually, probably through my work, I've translated my own psychological and psychic development, and also my own consciousness. As I move on further into my work, it tells a little bit about my own state of mind. How like the seed would be like the beginning of something. And I painted abstract and I see things into the abstraction. And when we go to the next paintings, I'll explain what it is. Well, this one was a desire for creating a space, and it's definitely optical. And in a very unconscious way, I was looking for repetition, like the fractal is, you have an element like a cauliflower, and every bud in the cauliflower is exactly the same as the whole. So I guess somewhere I was unconsciously looking for that. Okay. Okay, watching the light. That painting has a lot to do with, it's sort of like a stage, and we are as humans on a stage, looking at ourselves, like it's like I'm the viewer, but the characters are also looking out into a landscape that is lit up, and the light comes through to us. There's a lot of darkness, but I guess we need to look for the light and make it more important.
I love this like iridescent kind of nacreous concrete texture. There's like this hard but like aurora borealis color shifting thing you're doing. It's a wonderfully inventive world you've made. I'm also wondering, it reminds me a little bit of like artists like kind of Southern and Eastern European surrealists like Dado or like Luba. I'm wondering if those are of interest to you or you're thinking about them.
Not them specifically, but in 1973, previously to that, my paintings were more abstract, more optical. And I came to a stage where I discovered an artist in Vienna who revived the old masters technique, which consists of mixing oil and water, water-based. And so with egg tempera, sorry about that, egg tempera and oil glazes. And so what happened at that point was that, sorry about that.
You're fine.
What happened at that point was the abstract, I could see the abstract, but I could flesh out what I was seeing and make it more realistic. And so these are the paintings that started manifesting at that point.
Beautiful.
So, well, what I say, also one thing that I'm interested in and sort of that came up is pareidolia, the word pareidolia. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I figured out how, like you see things in the cracks on the wall and the floor, and I, coming from the abstract layers, I would see things, and then it was pareidolia. That's what I was doing. I was bringing out the pareidolia. So
wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah, that comes across in the abstract paintings, or that commitment to seeing representation within what started off as abstraction. I love that.
Okay, thank you.
Is this a tempera painting as well?
Yeah, they are. They are mostly after 1973. Most of my paintings. I'm sorry about the phone.
You're fine. You're fine.
You're okay.
I'm sorry. What are you saying?
Oh, so you're saying most of your paintings after were tempera, I think is where you're going.
Yes, they were. But eventually, once I understood the process of what the tempera does, basically what you do, you work on a colored ground, and with egg tempera, you build the volume, the light and the shadow, and then you glaze it. So eventually I understood what he was doing, and I don't need to do that. And I know the effect I want to get. And lately, some of my newer paintings, I'm using acrylic. And I found acrylic very forgiving because you can change things. If you don't like something, you can paint over it. And then my intention is to glaze it with oil eventually. So, okay.
I mean, I think it really works as this like metaphysical dream space, and I love that you start off with tempera and like kind of a fresco language that really makes you kind of keep colors separate, like light, mid-tone, shadow, and then you carry that into everything else. But how are you thinking of that when you really caught on to that type of language that you knew that's what you wanted to get? Like, how are you drawn to it in terms of the content?
Well, I was always sort of, I started more abstract, and I was always, sort of seeing things and asked me for something. And I said, well, it's really like looking into a crystal ball. My paintings are like a crystal ball where I see, and eventually they take a long time. Some of these paintings take years and months. I work on many pieces. I get tired of one, I move on to another one. And then eventually I see what was wrong with the previous one. So, you know, like the crystal ball part is, I mean, it has to mean something. And what I do is I edit along the way until it gets to a meaning. All right.
Well,
so it's like association shape, like associating shapes and things, you know, that work together.
And it's such a powerful aesthetic that you've developed for the crystal ball, like that proto-Renaissance look that was so important to shaping the way we visualize the world and think of pictorial space and think of its relationship to the portal on the wall or the fresco. Like you're really like building out from an early part of how we dreamed or how we learned to like imagine a picture in our minds, which I think is really effective.
Thank you.
Next one.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is stunning in person. I as well as an image. Love this one.
Yeah, it does deal with dream in this one. You know, it's basically somebody mentioned, you know, these are like portals. A window is a portal into the outside, and a mirror is a reflection of the self. So this painting just happened. I don't know. And definitely I'm very occupied with our place in the cosmos. And I'm absolutely curious about, you know, our understanding of the universe that is expanding, you know, very rapidly now. You know, like people are accepting, oh yes, UFOs, yeah, maybe they do exist. Maybe aliens do exist. Maybe they're among us. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I certainly include them in my cosmology. Yeah.
I love, yeah, I mean, I know you said you don't know how this painting came about, but it, out of these works, it is your most, it implies narrative or more than the others, or it seems more, you say you don't dream, but what was the starting point of this painting? Or where did it come out of?
I don't know. I did have I mean, I work sometimes from photographs. I think I had a photograph of this person. And then I started with that. And then everything else built, you know, sort of manifested itself. I don't know. I can read you a little something, you know.
I'd love that.
Okay. Forming a bridge to the world of the unseen. A word or an image is symbolic when it implies more than its obvious and immediate meaning. The regions of unidentified objects journeys into the real and fantastic. To allow the subconscious to come true to look and recognize it as the psyche revealing itself through layers of being, where the abstract becomes the melting, changing forms of associations. My phone doesn't stop ringing, it's awful.
You're fine. That was beautiful. It's a beautiful text. I like your, I like the incorporation of the unidentified object in that.
Okay.
MM, could you share with us or intro us into Olga's video?
Yes, it's a film. It's my pleasure to introduce Olga's amazing Alchemy Blues. It was created in 1974. It's on 16 millimeter. It's color, it's sound, it's 10 minutes, but we're going to see a short excerpt. And it's 16 millimeter film strip. Olga painted, scratched, and created a sense of abstraction, visual, light, form, movement, and space on, it's called direct animation, on the film strip itself. So it's a visual music, And Olga belonged to women artist filmmakers. And this group of women, and Olga created amazing, unique works of art that should be seen, and it's hard to see, but we'll have it on VOD, the entire film, right? So, anything else, Olga?
Just trying to think. No.
So it's a
I mean,
visual music, and it's hand painted on the 16mm film strip itself.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, we can skip that. All right.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that video. And also, I told MM before in our pre-check, MM's incredible video film of Jack Smith's studio I shared with my students this morning, and is a wonderful trip through his life and what he offered the world. And Olga, I love the sense of space you're creating, and any film sequence that thinks of the stoppages and cuts within the film strip as each individual thing, not creating a gestalt, but instead creating the possibility of endless paintings is
Right.
beautiful.
And, moving, right? And I think I did something strange there. I used Miles Davis in reverse for the sounds.
Oh, wow.
I think that's what I did. I know I did in one of my favorite, but it could have been in this one because my other films are like straightforward sound, you know. So it was made out of frustration. I couldn't afford to film. It was very expensive, you know, 16mm film at the time. And I just decided, okay, it's not going to stop me. So.
Of course, somehow his music is wonderful in reverse too. It's great to, I mean, the one thing before I want to open it up to questions, and I have a question before I let everyone else jump in. But I was thinking of our poetry editor, Anselm Berrigan, has a line in a poem I was reading the other day: "Can I defer to curiosity?" And I think all of you in this show are resisting professionalization, resisting speed, and insisting on this like slow, contemplative searching. There's like a real riddle at stake within all of this work that I think is marvelous, and the world needs more of. Drawings and films and videos that take years to make and aren't fulfilling some type of formula. I can't send enough people to this show because of that speed that you're all requiring us to have, and I thank you for it. But I would also like, my question before I open up to everyone, how does Jungian active imagination play a role within your work? Or how are you channeling a mysterious practice that is unplanned? And how are you creating this curiosity in a way? Or are there ways that you're doing that?
You talking to me?
I'm sorry, I'm opening this up
Okay,
to all
okay.
three of you at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
And go for it.
Okay. Well, I really believe that there are many different, like the Swedenborgian said, there are many different intermediary states. I've always believed in the visionary experiences, and I've always believed in the dream experiences. And I think active imagination is a huge part of my process, because I've got the drawings going sort of as in my mind. It's a world that I enter in my brain all the time. So I live in that world all the time. I mean, I live in the modern world, but I also live in the classical world, and I live in a kind of an imaginal space all of the time in my head. And I was really grateful to grow up in Colorado and New Mexico, where the idea of visionary experiences was sort of considered to be something quite normal. I was really grateful to grow up around Native Americans. I was really grateful to grow up in a kind of visionary Catholic society, and where this wasn't really frowned upon. I think that the imagination can be a real healing space. And I don't know, Olga, why don't you say something, sweetheart?
Well, first of all, I'd like to mention something. I belong to a society, and it's called the Society for Art of Imagination. And it was created by Brigitte Marlin in the 60s. She also studied the old masters technique with Ernst Fuchs, who revived it. And so I guess imagination is sort of like a medicine, for the future, to go beyond what we're stuck on. And everything is always moving. Nothing stays the same, but imagination is, I think, survival. It goes to, always finding a different solution. And whether it's the art, generally in art is visionary. A lot of people were talking about visionary art. Now, a lot of people are doing visionary art now, but it is something that is important to open up to, other possibilities, which are not just what you see and live with. There's always more to life, and with imagination, we just open up the doors. So
Yes.
Yeah.
I would like to say quickly that I teach cameraless filmmaking. And the important thing is to have patience, process, and time. And like Olga's film, you look at it and you say it's 3 minutes, but it's 24 frames a second. It's 40 frames a minute. And she's actually creating and scratching on the surface of the film itself. So it's framing and creating your world, and having the patience to fail and keep trying. And for me, I like cameras. I like framing the world and looking at, and a lot of my students will download from the internet and create a film. And I love teaching in like 2 minutes. whereas both Anne and Olga's work are is a process that takes time and experimenting and thinking about not just the imagination, but identity. And to me, both Anne and Olga are exploring identity. Like my name is Mary Magdalene. And in my own work, I'm interested in exploring other people, but also the underground and the outsider artists and the fringes of society, which is very interesting. So, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk about these works, to experience the work. And I'd love to thank the Brooklyn Rail for giving us the opportunity to speak about the creative process.
Well, I think I speak for everyone that the thanks is on our end for this incredibly generous show you put together, and the work that, again, is insisting on a slow speed. And you're really giving us a very generous thing by searching through these drawings and these films and these paintings over the course of years of your life, and not starting off with a result in mind, but finding it. And I think that, like, that in itself is a generosity that demands consideration. And it's something that I wish there was more of. So thank you to all of you for doing it. And my last question before I hand it over to all of you, because I know you probably have a lot of things you want to ask these marvelous artists, is something I appreciate within Alchemy is that it's always balancing the physical realm and the spiritual realm, you know, or like to get into Swedenborg, it's the idea that you're walking and that heaven is open up to you, and you can look into heaven while you're walking down the street, the visionary practice. And within alchemy, within Eastern alchemy, your horoscope plays a large part in whether or not you're able to do the process. It has to be at the right time. It has to be your alignment. It has to be how you are physically and your health and your outlook to the world to be able to pull off these rituals. And I guess my question for the three of you is, how do you relate the self as you're in this process? And I don't want to use the word boredom, but going back to what MM brought up, you're allowing yourself the time to be curious. And I think it's an active mind, but it's also the time to let your mind wander that is incredibly fugitive now. How is your physical body working when you're making these works, is what I really want to know.
I try to forget my physical body and forget myself and just be immersed in the moment in what I'm doing. And that's important to me. And also not being willing to work on a piece that might not be seen. Like you mentioned, Jack Smith's Apartment, which I didn't know was a film. And I thought of it as, I have to do this because this is a major artist that he's dead and they're going to throw everything on the street and in the trash. So I actually paid Larry Fessenden, who's an amazing cameraman. The lights were out, we used a flashlight. And then I went in, and it was only decades later that I actually showed it and premiered it when Joe Wakeman looked at it. So sometimes you discover who you are, not immediately, it doesn't, or decades later through my work. And that's all. Well, with a name like Mary Magdalene, how could I forget the physical self and the feminist identity?
Very good. Yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of care and recovery and like making sure that he is remembered in that film. I highly recommend everyone watch it. All right, with that, I'll open up to everyone else's questions because I want you all to have access to do so. But thank you all for an incredible show and this conversation.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you, Olga. Thank you, MM. Thank you, Anne, for that amazing conversation. We do have several questions from the audience. The first is from Savannah. Savannah, I'm going to offer to unmute you so that you can ask your question directly if you'd like, or I can read it on your behalf.
Oh, yes.
Hi.
Hi. Yes, I was curious, what is that there are in Anne's work? There are so many antique medicine bottles that have that specific shape. What is the symbolism? And David had answered it, but I wanted to see what your response was too.
That's the alchemical vessel. That's the
Okay.
alchemical vessel which holds the process. And this is a very important part for the artistic process. It's important in terms of the analytical transference as well, that the alchemists are often shown with the process. All of the different alchemical processes are shown in text with these alchemical vials, with the process happening, like the Negredo, the Albedo, the Rubedo, or whatever. And it's symbolic of a process where there has to be something contained. Like when I'm working on a drawing or when I'm working with an image, it has to incubate. That's like the egg in my drawings. Incubation, like the chicken and the egg, means a sleeping within. And the process is enclosed in a vial, and it's also enclosed in your psyche. When I'm doing a drawing, when I'm working on this process, I don't discuss it with people. I don't even discuss it with my analyst sometimes. She'll say, what are you working on? I'll say, I don't want to talk about it. So that you have to have a kind of containment for the process. It's like if you break the egg before the chicken's ready to hatch, it's just, it's not going to do too well. You're just going to get a scrambled egg. So this idea of this containment is very important. We live in a society that does not honor the process of introversion. And I think that introversion is an incredibly important part of the process. I'm an introvert, so I don't have that issue, but this idea of allowing yourself to go within, and oddly enough, I think that the vessel, there are two important things in alchemy. One is the containment of the process within the vessel, and the other is the furnace, which you saw in all my drawings. This idea of keeping the fire in the furnace level, so that you're always involved in the process. I'm involved in the process 24/7. I've never been in it for fame. I've never been in it for money. If I were in it for fame or money, I'd be painting paintings like Donald Sultan or something, with little lemons and oranges that sell. I wouldn't be doing what I do. I think that for me, art is really a vocation. I was too crazy and wild to become a nun. I was a Catholic slut, so I couldn't really go the nun route. But I think that my art became a devotion.
Mm.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer, Anne, and thank you for that question, Savannah.
Thank you.
Our next question is going to be from GE. GE, I'm going to ask you to unmute now.
Thank you so much, Chloe, and thank you, Andrew, and everybody. And listening in today, specifically for Olga and Anne, but also to MM, because I think there's other parallels here too. I keep hearing and seeing sort of like four parallels of inspiration and cosmology and spirits and occult phenomenology and of course alchemy, probably five. Especially coming down sort of in a lineage from Hildegard von Bingen and Marjorie Kemp and Hilma af Klint. And also Metterlinck's occult writing. Do all three of you or any of you at all see your work as being in dialogue with these pioneers and artists? I thank you.
Yeah, I do, definitely. I mean, I first was in a show with Hilma af Klint at PS1 in 1979, I think, called Images of the Unknown. That was the first time I saw her work in the flesh. And then I've seen her exhibitions in Berlin, et cetera. But I definitely was always interested in the work of Hildegard von Bingen. I've always been interested in that kind of visionary art, no matter who's doing it. And also in the Native American tradition. That was my specialty in art history. That's what I taught in the beginning. And I was always interested in visionary experiences and in things like, you know, I don't know, in things like the ghost dance tradition, and even the images of the ghost dance. So all of this is always, I mean, not just Western and Christian things, but also Native American things like, you know, the ghost dance has always intrigued me. And also the messianic traditions. The ghost dance was a messianic tradition. So Olga, do you have something on that?
I'm sorry, I forgot what the question was. Yeah, I'm just going to read something, okay?
Absolutely.
Chemical design, formation, adapt to a specific image. Animals, beings levitating, cities, landscapes, world within worlds, galaxies, form within form. Taking on the characteristics of a bird whose wings coloring matches the foliage in its surrounding. I'm talking about color and form to make something out of nothing. Painting as an alchemical process. I'm talking about the realm of the psyche, soul ecology, the transmutation of familiar imprinting. I don't know, did I read that before? No.
Beautiful.
No,
Yay.
yes.
That covers the waterfront.
Yeah. I think that does a really thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about or get to, but it reminds me of some of the language of like spell of the sensuous, that the role of the shaman in other cultures has no relationship to the miracle, as a relationship to opening up your subjectivity to trees and the river and connecting you to the land. And I think all of you, again, there's this radical interiority that you're doing. You're going so far into your own subconscious, and there's such a curiosity that it opens up to this collective subjectivity because of your generosity. So thank you again.
Thank you.
I love that. I love that writing, Olga. That was beautiful.
That was wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Olga and Anne, for those answers. And thank you, GE, for that amazing question.
Thank you.
Our next question is from David in the audience, but it's going to be asked by my colleague, Carolyn.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. So David in the chat wrote, which is similar to Savannah's question, and do the symbols in your work require active understanding into the classical alchemical symbolism, or do they speak to the unconscious and thereby prove as effective? I know you sort of spoke to this, but if you want to expand.
Well, I mean, I do study alchemy. I've studied alchemical texts at the Corazzini, at the Vatican Library, all kinds of places since 1972. I've been involved with the study of alchemy. So I certainly meditate on alchemical texts. And then I have many and I got into the alchemical texts because my dreams were full of alchemical symbolism. But the thing about alchemy is that, you know, when you look at an alchemical text, it's often full of surprises. You know, you get some strange monster that, you know, and that's the thing about the unconscious. It brings up all kinds of mysterious contents. And sometimes both with a drawing, with something I've done in a drawing, with an alchemical text, I don't really think about it or understand it till much later, which is rather interesting. I was showing somebody that drawing in the Edlin Gallery, and I looked down in the lower right-hand corner, and there's an alchemical vial containing an Egyptian scarab coming to life. And I didn't remember doing it. You know, I was standing looking at that drawing thinking, wow, did I do that? Or, you know, what it, so that's the wonderful part, is that, you know, as Olga says, it kind of comes through our fingers and into the work. And I think that it's mysterious. It's mysterious for me. I mean, I had put that drawing that's in the Edlin Gallery of the whale away, thinking it was a failure, that it was just too weird to be shown. And Orly came and dug it out and said, no, we have to show this. And I said, are you sure? And I put it up, and I, you know, and I been looking at that thing because we were installing it and stuff, thinking, this is so strange. Where in the process was I when this was coming up? It was very mysterious. So the thing that frightens people about the unconscious is it's mysterious and we have no control over it. People are terrified of things they can't control. That's one of the big problems with a lot of kind of art education programs today, is people think that they should approach art in some sort of formulaic way. You know, today we're going to be dealing with issues of gender or issues of this or race or issues of that or that, and we're going to take it into a formula and we're going to work with it that way. And I love political art. I love George Grosz. I love, you know, I've written a lot about Alfredo Yar's work, but I think that it's important to understand the importance of what can't be controlled and the importance of what can't be completely understood. I've read certain alchemical texts, like I've read Michael Meier. I've read Michael Meier since 1977. And every few years, I'll look at one of those drawings and I'll think, I didn't understand that. And a whole new level of meaning comes up. I really get that a lot with something like the Mutus Liber. I mean, so it's never cut and dried. Does that answer any question, or am I being kind of?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you so much.
And I think going off that, Anne, like, or, you know, there are all those wonderful drawings in the Atalanta Fugians that are, you know, like, look at the woman washing clothes, or like you're looking at like ordinary activities to understand the alchemical process and like enchanting the world around you. And you're right that Jung is about as anti-communication theory as you can get, or like late Jung is like, if you hear anything I say, there's no answer to any of this. There's no, you can't you can't turn this into a method of understanding a dream. There's the reward in searching, but there's not going to be the answer.
You know, alchemical dreams are very commonplace too. What Andrew said is really important. That's in the Atlanta Fugians, it's of the woman washing the clothes. But also, if you have a dream, say like a pot boiling over on your stove, that's a very big alchemical image. It's called tapas, the heating of the waters. So there's a hexagram about it in the I Ching. You know, basic common life is also full of kind of alchemical processes and symbols. That was a perfect. Thank you, Andrew. That was a point that needed to be made. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question, David. Thanks for asking it, Carolyn. And thanks for all of your answers. The last comment is from Lenore in the audience. Lenore, I'm going to offer you the chance to unmute. And if you'd like to, you can ask directly. Otherwise, I will ask on your behalf.
Okay. I wrote a text about minimalism, and I actually just wrote a text to Anne about it for her to look at later. Yeah, it's clear to me that
I turned off my phone. Oops.
Oh, I'm out. Let me see if I can get a picture of me going. Start video. Okay. Yeah, I mean, as a former art historian, I was part of the movement, the pop art movement, and minimalism and everything else. And you know, on the other hand, the abstract expressionists were that spirituality was everything to them. So you were looking at a new age of materialism and a revelry of materialism and of masculinity and at Greenberg. And so that ushered in, you know, decades and decades of a prejudice against spirituality, which was also associated with the feminine. And so now that we are living in a chaotic and a terrifying world for which we have no answers, we have no good practical answers, we all need to move back to what has sustained human beings since the beginning of time. I mean, it sounds very flowery and all that, but I do believe it. And I think I totally believe that Anne is going to be the leader of us. She's going to be our leader. So
You're just
can I just say one thing? This is a little irrelevant, but I remember that Vito Acconci visited, I teach and have been teaching at the New School. Vito Acconci, the great, some of you know who he is and some don't, but those who do revered him. And he said, yeah, when I was a young artist, I realized that I was a weirdo. And then I realized I could be the leader of weirdos. Now, Vito Acconci was a great artist, brilliant, genius. So I see Anne as being a leader of a new movement in art. I really do. So.
Oh, you're so sweet, Lenore. You're so sweet. I think Lenore is just saying this because I taught her the St. Anthony prayer the other day so she could find her purse.
Unconsciously, yes. Unconsciously, yes.
I have a question, and it's a political question. Like, I teach at the New School, and we're on strike. But the thing is that I used to be able, when I first started teaching decades ago, design my own classes, and I could teach sex, gender, and media. And now there's so much they censored out the word sex. And everything is so bland. And I'm wondering when the Equal Rights Amendment will pass for women. If you don't have equal rights under the law, they'll never elect a woman president. You don't have rights over your own body. And so when I teach, I thought, no wonder they're censoring the classes I teach.
Really? What program do you teach in? What program do you?
When I first started, I don't know, New School for Social Research. Then they changed it to School and Public Engagement. Now I'm teaching persons, I'm teaching film.
I see. Mhm.
By teaching film, painting on film or cameraless film, they don't have to deal with the body so much.
Yeah.
I think in academia there has been a huge censorship. I mean, I had to deal with Wertmeister in graduate school. I discovered how difficult the Frankfurters were in graduate school. And I think that part of the problem was just the Frankfurt School, which really had terrible issues with spirituality and the feminine, I think. And also, formalism was rough. Minimalism was definitely a boys' club. And I think that the whole art discourse, was really taken over by, and it was sad. I mean, even if you look at something like Lenore was talking about, the abstract expressionists, Pollock worked with Violet de Laszlo, a Jungian analyst. He got Henderson. He worked with Henderson, who got into trouble for selling some of his drawings. But even after Pollock, there was like a huge kind of thing to erase that part of Pollock's history. To really, people really didn't want to talk about that. They'd give it a Freudian interpretation, but boy, you didn't want to discuss all those titles that dealt with alchemical subjects. I mean, there was a huge censorship where everything had to be a kind of formalist, maybe a little bit of Freud thrown in, but you don't touch Jung. Steiner was completely off the charts. I mean, and then with the Frankfurters, I mean, you couldn't discuss, I know, the criticisms of Beuys by people like Buchloh, where you could not really discuss his relationship to Steiner, his relationship to Catholicism, his interests in alchemy. I mean, all of these things were really taken off the table. And I think that Hilma of Klint was a breakthrough, but there were also about 5 exhibitions dealing with the thinking of Rudolf Steiner in Europe the last 6 or 7 years. I think that this lockdown is beginning to crack, and and I think that hopefully a few doors have been opened. A lot of us paid a heavy price for it by getting deplatformed or losing our jobs or whatever. But I think that I was talking to Susan Lacey about it, and she said, oh my God, I'm going to make a huge list of the women who've suffered. I think that things are breaking up, but I think that there are a lot of departments that are, will be a long time coming.
Thanks everyone for those answers to Lenore's question. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading, and we are thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Bianca Rae Messinger, here to the stage. Before Bianca reads, I will introduce her. A poet and translator living and working in Buffalo, Bianca Rae Messinger is the author of the long poem, The Land Was Thee There, and the chapbook, The Love of God. Her chapbook, Parallel Bars, was the winner of the 2021 Center for Book Arts Chapbook Prize. Her translations of South American authors have been published for the Berlin Biennale, Monster House Press, and many others, and she writes for Ramona in Buenos Aires. Welcome, Bianca.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me for that wonderful conversation. So I'm going to read an excerpt from a novella. So it's about half poetry, half fiction, currently called Blue Girl Rose, and it takes its opening from an epigraph by Leslie Scalapino. The visual space is authoritarian space collected from the air. That's from Dahlia's Iris. Heloise, having found Daniela's account to her. I'm writing this now from bone, having been unable to write it in Bredonia for obvious or maybe not so obvious reasons. To say things might be otherwise is to consider this a tragedy, which it isn't quite. In and around where the mountains meet and where we were hiding there, they made a kind of drop off. Let me try a bit harder. In meeting where it was, we tried to sketch the frame to the door, to get it. Having hiked all day to get out there, again with the whole fear of the natural order button illuminated, it made things a little easier, but the rocks were still slippery and Joe had some trouble with them. Even we had the buttons on, the goddamn buttons on. The world did not know her while she was here. We stay here to cry and write to you, we guess. It had something to do with the setting coming to life and my obsession with mediocrity and an attempt to get rid of it. And there was real violence in the valley, having something to do with the way the rocks funneled things towards us. This isn't to say we failed necessarily, but the sense or moment, better yet, of order we developed there can't be recreated. Like here, we can't even describe it right. But then again, maybe that's the point. Anyways, we couldn't face making a merchandise of the mind body, and they probably knew that from the beginning, but we managed to trick them for a moment, and that's why we're writing you. Shit gets weird, as in demarcations deep in the rock weird, or like the kind we get from penance. And of course, the way he used his stick on us, notwithstanding, we loved that. We obviously don't have the buttons on in the account. They took them from us, but Nat did manage to get the details from Apotheca's servers, sounding so old, before they declared war on the Rays. There are a couple other things I'm missing here, but just so you have it. D. 1. You could call it all a kind of attempt at husbandry. Starting by the ruined fountain where she was in the garden, Daniela continued the round path forward in between the roses. In between the roses, she is finding Joe there and resting, knowing light came down from above. But the rays didn't knock into each other, instead reaching towards the petals themselves individually as a kind of inculcation to where they were, to mean an interaction. To start the reordering? Not yet. She begins to rest, finding one of the many wooden banquettes surrounding the roses. Or were the banquettes also walls? Joe's hand goes up and down the line of a dress, meaning he feels inclined to respond. Her not being where she was, being unable to feel this place, it having to be filled with other places first, thinking, as it came back again, of fucking, in the sense where each other line ran between each other again. There was a chair lying, surrounded by roses, and Joe begins also gesturing towards them. Opening up one by one, blossoms seem to be arriving, as they did late in the night. Joe motions to Daniela as she's lost in the velvet petals and starts again. The nerves seem to connect more to a system of the soul than you wanted to admit at the time, I think. Not knowing where the beach ended, being blindfolded, adding to it. The feeling of, but not necessarily to, being dumped here in this place. Not because of a consequence, but adding as in next to it, where we were, by the rocks, and I was shaking to see if the nerves would realign. Or not exactly, more to see what would happen to the transmigration of souls. Could we join it? But not through the dying way, through the other one. It's a little harder to replicate. It wouldn't work like that one time we did on the beach, for example, because of, like I said, too much of one kind of energy. Danielle lets him trail off and looks around. There was a small portion of the garden not filled with roses, and she had been sitting, not looking at Joe or not having to, knowing that a progression would occur, knowing blood had something to do with nerves and with the roses, in a more general meaning, but trying not to get too ahead of it. She walked out into the kind of smoky dusk punctuated by lines of pink surrounding the garden. All that can be seen beyond the circular wall, meaning above it. It gave the idea of there being an outside. Rubbing her eyes and peering her head out, each side proves impossible to describe, especially with her recording playing where it did in her mind. So she's back in the garden, to be in a place where the illusion of endlessness had been obtained. Looking outwards at the soft, glistening folds of the roses, she notices the petals eventually hit at a moment of impossible coupling. The petals to her seemed to have no relation to the stalk. And it wasn't just because they were in a trapped world. It was like how when she drew them as a child and could never understand the relationship between top and bottom, the switch, this drop and change between forms, always scaring her when there's no relation. Maybe because it's so fucking terrifying. At some point, the petals start to gather upwards. They start to know history, which is to mean their own terror. She focuses, the rose comes back, she comes inside of it. In the simulation, we can only present it as either wet or not wet. She can't stop when she's in this state. It wasn't that it's rare, she never came as a result of rarity, but instead of being overwhelmed by placing herself in a position she knew she couldn't escape. Thank you.
Bianca, that was amazing. Thank you so much for reading today. That was amazing. And a really amazing extension of today's conversation. Thank you, MM. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Olga. Thank you to Andrew, who hopped off to teach a class. And thank you to all of you for joining us today for this NSE. And we'd also, of course, like to thank the team at Andrew Edlin Gallery, who helped make today's event possible and sent over amazing installation views and artwork views for us to show all of you. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation, who sponsor our NSE program and make daily conversations like this one possible, and for their support of our growing archive. You can view today's event and our full archive on our YouTube channel. For 22 years, the Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our monthly publication and public events. Like here on our daily NSE, you can check the chat for a link to donate to support the writers, editors, and operations here at the Rail. And if you're free tomorrow at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with Pamela Sneed, Jill Cassid, and Kevin Keelis Bonilla, and Ksenia M. Soboleva on the occasion of Indisposable Tactics for Care and Mourning at Ford Foundation Gallery in New York. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Phoebe Osborne. And as is Rail tradition, thank you so much for joining, and you can now turn on your microphone and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you so much, Chloe. Thank you.
Thanks, Chloe.
Loved it. Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you, MM.
Charles, thank you, Rail. Thank you, Chloe. Everybody, we were wonderful. Thank you.